Nadal's confirmed his return to the ATP Tour at the Brisbane International Tournament in preparation for the Australian Open. There was a lot of speculation as to whether the Spaniard would be fit for the Australian Open in 2024, and this news indicates that he is confident he will be. The Spaniard released a short video explaining that he was now confident that he could finally say that he would be playing the tournament in Australia at the warm-up 250 tournament, and it's very interesting news. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how I think 2024 might look like for Rafael Nadal in what could be his last year on tour. I say what could be because Nadal, throughout the 2023 season, he barely played any matches. He stopped playing the season after the Australian Open due to injury, and he sat down and had a press conference at some point during the season saying that actually he thought that potentially he might not even be able to play competitive tennis again. And if he was able to, 2024 would be his planned last season on tour. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get really stuck into how the season might look for him in terms of not just what he's going to win and what he's not going to win, but what's his level potentially going to look like? Where does he fit in now into the ATP landscape after being out for nearly a year on tour? Before we do though, remember to that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform. Thank you to all our members as well. You guys are all legends for tuning in as always. Okay, so what I want to talk about is actually his win percentage per season, and also on surface for the last. I want to go to 2019, so the last 4 years, just to kind of get an indicator of what we might expect. So I'm just bringing it up here. Now you can see in 2023 he only played 4 matches, won 1, lost 3. So this isn't a great indicator. He was injured, of course, as well. Lost to Mackenzie McDonald in the second round of the Australian Open. And look, I mean, only played on hard court, you can see 25%. So we can discard the season, I think. 2022, now this was a really, really good season for Nadal. And you could say similarly to the tournament, well, you could say similarly to the season coming up, the 2024 season, he had a long layoff going into the 2022 season where he had, well, after the Roland Garros 2021 loss to Djokovic, he ended up taking a extended break due to injury and whatever else it might have been. Came back for a warm-up Melbourne Somerset, a tournament before the Australian Open, and went on to win it, which was incredible. Now he will be coming back into the Australian Open with a much longer layoff, because it wouldn't have been Roland Garros in 2023 that he ended up, playing and then missing the rest of the season after. It was the Australian Open, so that's a good few more months that he would have had to rehab, to recoup, and I think most importantly, he would have had to have done without playing competitive tennis. And that's the biggest issue, I think, is he did so well in that 2022 Australian Open to come back from such a long layoff and perform so well. Can he do the same 2 years later, 2 years older, at 37 years of age, and after a longer layoff, with as well Novak Djokovic in the field? Because in that 2022 season, he wasn't in the field, Djokovic, and I'm not saying that Nadal wouldn't have won it, but of course Djokovic is the best player ever at the Australian Open, so that definitely was a helpful factor, let's say. So 2022, you can see here, won the Australian Open, won Roland Garros, Acapulco, Melbourne as well. So 4 titles, including 2 Grand Slams, a really good year. Final of the Indian Wells Masters tournament, Wimbledon semi-finalist, and had to skip the semi-final and withdraw from it before even starting against Kyrgios due to an ab injury that he sustained in the quarterfinal against Taylor Fritz. Madrid Masters quarterfinal there as well, lost to Alcaraz, who went on to then beat Djokovic in the semi-finals, and then Zverev in the final in an incredible run. His overall win percentage of 83%, very impressive, 39 wins to 8 losses. And interestingly here, very high percentage of wins on hard court, 24-6, 10-2 on the clay, grass 5-0, which is good, 100% there as well. So 83%, and these stats, something to kind of just bear in mind as we get through the years. 2021, he didn't play as many matches, 24 wins, 5 losses, overall win percentage of 82.8%, so a slight dip. Also a dip on the hard court surface, going from, I think it was 80%, if I'm not mistaken, to 71.4%. Only played 7 matches on hard court, though, so 5-2. On clay, 19 wins, 3 losses, 86.4% is very impressive on the clay for Nadal as well. So the issue he would have had, though, is that he won 2 clay court tournaments, but neither of them were Roland Garros, which would have been a massive disappointment. Lost to Djokovic in the semi-finals of Roland Garros, and that would have really stung, no doubt. And of course, this was the year where he didn't play after Roland Garros, so played really half a season. Then 2020, 79.4% win ratio, or win percentage, sorry, which is a bit lower than the previous year. 27-7. Roland Garros won that, and Acapulco. Interestingly, clay percentage went up to 90%, which is really high. 9-1. Hardcore percentage, not great by his standards at 75%, 18-6 there. But then if we go to 2019, this was his best year in the last, I'd say, in the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years. Won Roland Garros and the US Open, Rome Masters, Canada Masters, so 4 tournament wins, exactly the same as the 2022 season. But what's impressive is that he also made the final of the Australian Open, and he had an 89.1% overall win percentage, which is incredible. 57-7, 91% win percentage on hard court. Only lost 3 matches on hard court. Only lost 3 matches on clay. And what's even more interesting to me is the fact that his hard court percentage, or his hard court win percentage, was higher than his clay court win percentage, which is very rare for Nadal in a season. Clay was at 87.5% and grass 83.3%. Now, the general trend here is that 2019 was a great season, 89%, 79.4% to 82.8% to 83%. So, I mean, you can't really read into it too much. And of course, 2023, as I said, a big layoff. So it's interesting to look at. Doesn't really tell you much. Well, it just tells you that Nadal is one of the greatest players to ever grace a tennis court, and his level, even if it's not his top level, is normally good enough against most players. But the general trend, anyway, is that on clay, he's not as invincible as he once was. I think that loss to Djokovic in the semi-finals of 2021, and then also even the quarterfinal match they played in 2022, showed that Djokovic is a real threat to Nadal on clay at the moment. And that's a big issue because Djokovic against Nadal on any other surface is a big favourite at the moment on hard court or grass court. Even though the grass court head-to-head is 2-2, I think Djokovic would still be the favourite if they were to meet, say, at Wimbledon in 2024. And that brings me nicely onto the rivalry between himself and Djokovic and maybe Alcaraz and the rest of the field, and where does he fit in with the rest of the tour? It's an interesting one because it's very easy for me to sit here and say he's not going to be able to compete with Djokovic or Alcaraz this season. But if it's going to be a farewell season, which by the sounds of it, from what he said in the past 9 months, is that it will be, then I can't see Nadal not competing as hard as he can this whole year. Now, it can go one of 2 ways. One, his body holds up and his form and his level is there, despite the age, despite the layoff, and as someone as great as him, who continually bounces back from injuries and layoffs, it might just be a case of, look, it's just another time to bounce back off a layoff and come back strong. And he's been putting in the hard yards off court, on court for practice. Maybe he comes back and the level's really high and he surprises quite a few people it would be to then compete with the big boys at the top. Or, well, this is almost a 2A and 2B in terms of options. He comes back, his body doesn't hold up nicely, and he ends up getting injured, ends up being an injury-ridden season, or his level is just not there. His level is just not there. And the issue he's going to have is that he won't be seeded very high unless he's got a protected ranking at certain tournaments. His rank at the moment is 663 in the world. So he could potentially, in the Australian Open, for example, he could face Djokovic in the first round. That could happen. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And he'll obviously get a wild card at the Australian Open. And it's going to be intriguing to see whether he's able to, one, sort through the rankings as well, and two, what kind of crazy matchups we might see because his ranking is so low at the moment. So that'll be intriguing. But yeah, Djokovic is a nightmare, I think, for Nadal to face at any point this year coming up. What's going to be really important for Nadal, I think, is that Brisbane International Tournament, which starts on the 31st of December. If he can get pretty deep at that tournament in terms of making progress and playing some competitive matches against competitive players, even if it means just making the semi-final or quarter-final, as long as he gets 2 or 3 matches under his belt at least, as a minimum, it will be really helpful going into the Australian Open because it's much needed, right? Going into such a big slam. Whether that puts him in a better position than against Novak, it wouldn't in Australia, I don't think. It might put him in a slightly better position, but he's still a massive underdog. Even if he was fully fit and we knew his level was going to be high, Djokovic is still the favourite in Australia. That's just how it is. But what I will say is that Nadal has that memory of magic in the 2022 final against Medvedev, and maybe he might feel that he can replicate that type of feeling and magic during the season. And it might not be the Australian Open, but we know the 14-time Grand Slam champion or 14-time Roland Garros champion even is so in love with Paris, with Roland Garros, and it is a love affair that kind of transcends the sport, to be honest, because it's such a hard proposition playing him at Roland Garros, and that's where he's really going to be looking, I think, to push and try and win the tournament. There's also the Olympics, which again is in Paris, so it will be on clay. I'm very interested to see, will he, one, play the Olympics, and two, will he play doubles with Alcaraz for Spain, which would be a very, very exciting team up for one, and for two, Alcaraz will definitely help his chances of going deep if they do team up, that's for sure. But yeah, in terms of my predictions for how the season will go, I have a feeling I'm hopeful that he's going to stay fit. And I think if he stays fit, I think realistically he will have a pretty average, I would say, Australian summer. I think the Australian Open, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes out in the first week. I think he'll win. It really depends on the draw, but I think he might win 1 or 2 matches, maybe 3, but I don't see him going deep into the second week, for example. I'd be very, very surprised, although most people would have said that about him in the 2022 Australian Open tournament, and he proved us all wrong there. I think he'll be looking to peak during the clay court swing, and that's where he'll be looking to really go hard or go home. I also think he should be looking at Wimbledon and saying, look, these guys are not very experienced at Wimbledon. And yes, Alcaraz beat Djokovic in the final, great. But apart from Alcaraz and Djokovic, I don't really see anyone else winning Wimbledon right now. I just think it's a surface that there's so many players who haven't quite got to grips with the surface enough yet, not just with how it plays and the speed and the the different tactics that you might need to use on grass, but mainly the movement on the surface. And Alcaraz did incredibly well against Djokovic in the final of 2023. But yeah, I mean, Nadal will be hoping and thinking, look, if I can just avoid Djokovic and Alcaraz for as long as possible and hope that they maybe go out, I might have a chance because these guys are very, very inexperienced on grass. The US Open is not as slow as it used to be in previous years. It's still not quite as quick as the Australian Open, is still pretty quick. So again, not a tournament that he may have success at, but I think it's that middle part of the year is going to be crucial for him, and then the Olympics, and we'll see if he competes in that. He'll give it his all. And look, whether it's his last season or not, we shall see. But I would be surprised if his level is high enough and he wins, say, one or two slams, which would be very impressive, by the way, given the layoff. But if that was to happen, I'd be very surprised if he retires. I think if he doesn't win a slam the whole year and he gets nowhere close, I think he will definitely retire. That's what my thinking is behind Nadal's comeback and predictions of how I think the year will go. I do think he might win the 250, for example, on clay. Do I see him winning a Grand Slam? I'd like to be optimistic and say Roland Garros because I think it's very hard to back against Nadal when it comes to Roland Garros. But this is the least confident I think I felt about him going into a season and also into Roland Garros for a long time. But we'll see how the first part of the year goes because maybe he plays better and than expected, and then goes into the clay court swing with higher expectations from the rest of the tennis world because the form and level just looks higher than was initially, I guess, charted for the Spaniards. So we'll see. Alcaraz is also an interesting one in terms of the rivalry and also the rest of the field. Like Sinner now has come through Rune. How does Nadal hold up against these guys? Is he going to hold up physically? The problem with all three of those, Alcaraz, Sinner, and Rune, is that they can all match him now in terms of physicality, if not exceed his skill when it comes to physicality. So Nadal's going to have to be very clever, I think, this season, coming with being able to shorten the points at times, being able to be smart with his footwork, with his serve and volleying, with his transition game, with his angles. I think he needs to outmaneuver a lot of these young guns who have a lot of weapons, big, big talent, and it's not going to be an easy feat. But if anyone can do it, it's a Novak Djokovic or a Rafael Nadal. So let's see how he gets on in the season. I'm extremely excited to see him back in action. I think it's going to be great to see him. We may be covering it as media. Keep an eye out for that as well. And let me know in the comment section how you think Nadal's 2024 season is going to go and why. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Remember to hit that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating or review if you're listening on a podcast platform.